Like all H5P content types, we'll begin in our content bank by clicking the Add menu, and in this case, we'll scroll down until we see Drag and Drop. I do recommend entering full screen mode to have more room to work, and this will be a two-step process. The first step involves providing a title for your activity and determining whether or not you'll use a background image and your task size. A background image is entirely optional, and I typically recommend against using it. The task size determines how large the activity area will be. The default values tend to work well for most screens. Since I won't be changing my task size or adding a background image, I've added title and can now move to step 2, which is the task phase of building a drag and drop activity. Note that you can also click the next step button. H5P offers helpful tips on how to create this activity. Their general advice is to begin by placing your drop zones first, then the droppable elements. Drop zones and droppable elements can be created using the icons at the top of the box. Drop zones are represented by the target icon, and your droppable elements can be either text or an image. I have several illustrations of different intestines that I want my students to correctly label. I'll begin by creating 5 drop zones. To create my first, I'll click the drop zone icon at the top of the box, which opens up the task box. The label for my first drop zone will be liver. Typically, labels are not displayed for drop zones. However, since I want my students to correctly drag the correct intestine into the drop zone, I do need them to know where it goes. So in this specific use case, I'm going to check Show Label. Though we've encouraged you to only focus on settings with the asterisk in other parts of this course, it is worth taking a closer look at the 2 available settings on this page. My personal preference is to check both. The first restricts the drop zone to just 1 element instead of 2. The next is called Enable Auto Align. This will create a clean snap when you drag something into this drop zone. Once I'm done configuring my settings, I'll click the Done button to return to my screen. Here are a few tips I picked up along the way to make the next part of this process simpler, since I need to create 4 more drop zones for this activity. The first is that your droppable elements need to be the same size as the drop zone, and consequently the drop zone needs to be the same size as the image. I'm going to select my drop zone and then resize it. I'm then going to drag it into place and make sure that it fits nicely on my canvas. Since I already have this drop zone set up the way that I want it, I can click on it, click the Copy button, and then click the Paste icon at the top of the play box. Let's skip ahead. After I've copied and pasted the 5 boxes that I need, I'll click on the second one, then click the pencil icon to edit its settings. Since it copied all of my settings from earlier, like setting it to show the label and enabling auto align, I just need to update the name of the label, then click Done. I then need to repeat the process for the remaining boxes. Now that I've added my drop zones, I need to add my droppable elements. Since I'll be using images, I'll click the image icon at the top of the play box. If this looks familiar, it's because it's the same form used to add images to other types of H5P. I'm going to upload my first image by clicking Add, then selecting the file from my computer as if I were attaching it to an email. Be sure to always use alternative text in this activity, as alternative text will help make it fully accessible to all learners. After adding my image, my alternative text, I'll need to select a drop zone. A common mistake with this activity is selecting the specific drop zone that corresponds to this particular droppable element. If I only check one, then that will be the only drop zone where I can put this image. If I want to create a challenge for my students where they could potentially put this image in the wrong spot, I'll need to actually click Select All. This will allow the students to drag this image into any drop zone, even if that drop zone is not the correct one. When you're done, scroll down and click the Done button. Then drag the image to the place where it should go on the canvas. As I mentioned earlier, drag and drop will not shuffle the order of any potential responses that you add, so you'll need to do the shuffling yourself in this step. Let's time travel again as I add the rest of these. Now that I've added all of my droppable elements, I'll need to re-edit my drop zones. To do this, I'll click on that drop zone and select the pencil icon to edit it, then select the correct corresponding element. In my case, it's the image of a heart. I'll repeat this process for all of my drop zones. The last thing we suggest doing before clicking Save is scrolling down to the behavioral settings. These may be collapsed by default, and if that's the case, just click the behavioral settings heading to expand those options. What I strongly suggest doing is unchecking the Apply Penalties option. The reason I suggest unchecking this box is because if you leave it checked, each incorrect response will actually take a point away from students, instead of them just not earning that point as a baseline. This means that in my activity, a student could correctly answer 3 responses, but incorrectly answer 2, and as a result earn 3 points, but lose 2, and ultimately have just 1 point for the entire activity. I personally don't find that to be especially fair, so I uncheck Apply Penalties before I save my activity. Once you have the settings the way that you want them, scroll down and click the Save button to return to the content bank. I'll then be taken to a preview of the activity I've just created. This allows me to stress test it and confirm that my responses are correct.